A pensive and awful silence filled Independence Hall as America's founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence. You can imagine picking up that quill with clammy hands from the sweltering heat inside that building and the seriousness of that moment, an open and public act of treason. But it was in that moment that Benjamin Franklin quipped, "We must indeed all hang together, or most assuredly we shall all hang separately." At least that's according to legend. Whether Franklin actually made this wry observation is historically contested. But you can see how this story has found its way into the national mythos. And I've been thinking a lot about this story, not just because it's America's 250th birthday. That's all well and good. Happy birthday, America. But because for the better part of the last year, the coalition that elected President Donald Trump in November of 2024 has seemingly started to fracture. Every day it goes on, the he said, she said gets more and more absurd. So-and-so is paid by a foreign country. This person's a traitor. That person's a Nazi. There is a Catholic plot to overthrow the American founding. It's ridiculous. We must all hang together, or we shall all hang separately. That applies to right now. You already see the left organizing, scheming, preparing for the moment that they take back power. What do you think they'll do with that power when they have it? Of course, if they take back the House in the midterms, a Democratic House will impeach the president like they did last time. The Senate won't have the votes to convict. We went through all this 6 years ago. Did it stop there? No, of course it didn't. They weaponized the tech companies and the social media platforms, not just against the president with the Hunter Biden laptop, but against doctors and regular people just asking questions about COVID or transgenderism or any of the other shibboleths of the left. They weaponized the government against parents at school board meetings and labeled Catholics extremists. Why did they do that? Because their power was challenged. They were exposed. Their legitimacy was on the line. And history tells us that 9 out of 10 times, the response from the people in charge is going to be repression when they're challenged. It's ancient. It's like the first thing the people in charge do when they're questioned. You don't want to bend the knee? You don't want to pay tribute? Here's Sargon of Akkad marching his army through the city. Now you think really hard about what you're going to do next. And the weaker they get, the stronger the challenge is to their power, the more extreme their response is going to be. That's what you should be preparing for. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, a 2028 hopeful, basically the Democrat version of Chris Christie, is one of the many people on the left telling you what's coming. They want to criminally prosecute ICE agents. You think it's going to stop there? Of course it won't. So all of our energy should be focused on that. But the best we can do is a podcast war. You think the podcast war, which, by the way, these people flatter themselves by calling it a war. You think the podcast war is politics? It's not politics. In fact, it is the furthest thing from politics. I don't care where your favorite podcaster ended up on the latest influencer poll. It's not politics. Politics is building a team in pursuit of a singular focus. That focus is a flourishing society in which we protect the common good and inculcate virtue. And I'm not saying you need to be a plan truster on Iran or any other issue. I'm not a plan truster. In fact, I'm still pretty unsure what the plan even is. But the point is that while the right is so trained on itself, its petty grievances, its navel-gazing, that people don't want to be a part of it. They're tuning out when a few years ago they were tuned into this cultural shift. And we're seeing this reflected in public polling. From March 2025 to March 2026, we've seen the president's approval rating among Trump 2024 voters decline from around 90% to around 80%. And estimates vary. The range is 6% to 10%. You might say, well, that's not a big deal. Well, let's take the lower bound, 6%. If that 6% is evenly distributed geographically, and they don't show up or they don't pull the lever for conservatives in 2028, it's a wipeout. Conservatives didn't win Florida by more than 6 points in 2024. In 3 states, you can tie up the election. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, they go the other way. It's 270. Trump won all of those states by less than 2%. Is anyone talking about this right now? No, they're not. But this team, that coalition, is what gave conservatives a generational mandate. It cannot be squandered. It must be preserved. And there are very few people in this space that seem the least bit interested in preserving this coalition. One of those people is Michael Knowles. Michael Knowles gave a speech at TPUSA's America Fest in December of last year in which he called on conservatives to actually be conservative, to shed their ideology and do the hard work of politics. But a lot has changed in the 4 months since Michael gave that speech. The cracks that were showing in the conservative movement then have become chasms now. We're at war in Iran. That's a big change. Maduro's no more. So how do we do the hard work of politics? That's the question. And that's the question that needs to be answered as soon as humanly possible. So to discuss the hard work of politics, I present to you two podcasters. We hope you enjoy. Before we get into this week's interview on the Signal Sitdown, ring that bell to get notifications on future Signal Sitdown content. Hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you may be joining us. And then while you're at it, please leave us a 5-star review and comment who you'd like to see on a future episode of the Signal Sitdown. Remember, it's your government. It's your country. And together, we're taking it back. Without further ado, here's the interview. Michael Knowles, welcome to the Signal Sitdown.
Good to see you, sir. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us because I want to talk about how to maintain the coalition today. The vibes are mixed. At best, the vibes are mixed. You took to the stage at TPUSA America Fest. It was in December of last year, and a lot has changed in those last 4 months. But I want to read a portion of your speech because it cut, I think, right to the heart of the matter. We have the populists, the fusionists, the neocons, the paleocons, the Wall Street conservatives, the Main Street conservatives, the religious right, the irreligious right, the libertarians, the traditionalists, and a half a dozen other ideologies in the middle, all vying for power, all accusing the others of not being truly or sufficiently conservative. It goes on. The classical liberals accuse the post-liberals, the boomers accuse the zoomers, and on and on and on and on. Each faction claims that the true conservatism includes only its narrow ideology. The actual history of the American right tells a different story. In America alone, the right has been the party of tariffs, actually founded on tariffs, and then we hated tariffs, and now we kind of like tariffs again. We were the party against immigration, then we really liked immigration. We said all the immigrants are American, they just don't know it yet. And now we don't like immigration again. I think that's pretty clear. We have been the party of foreign policy restraint, and then of adventurism, now of restraint again. Does this mean, therefore, that we stand for nothing? No, it does not. It means that we respond to reality and that there is one. I thought this speech was fantastic. I texted you about it afterwards. It was the right message at the right time. Everyone, it's like the Michael Jackson video. It's like, put down your guns. Yeah. And move on. But so much has changed in the last 4 months. I guess the first thing that I want to ask you is, if America Fest was tomorrow, would you deliver that same speech or would you change it?
I would. Now, going along with my thesis, I would have to change it because we want to adapt to changing circumstances. That's one of the things that conservatives do. But the thrust of it would remain the same, which is that we require a coalition that involves people who disagree with one another. We have to think in a way that is beyond narrow ideology for numeric electoral reasons, but also because conservatism, such as it is more an inclination, it's more a desire, it's more an affection for one's home and one's own than it is a narrow ideology, which is in really the purview of the left. So for all those reasons, I would give substantially the same speech, which I'm really glad you liked. I'm glad I found the one person who liked my speech at TPUSA. And I actually, in fairness, I had some pretty big dogs texting me after that speech telling me they really liked the message. And I think the reason I was getting those texts is because my message was rather different than what most people were saying at America Fest, and because I was wedged right in between Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson, which is sort of like being positioned right between Iran and Iraq. It's not an enviable position to be. Mercifully, I had Russell Brand to break it up with some kind of psychedelia and a nice palate cleanser.
Everyone went on an ayahuasca trip in the middle,
yes.
And then they came back.
They did, but the reason that I think the people who did care for my speech, even if they didn't necessarily take the lesson to heart, the reason they did is because the essential message was that we should be doing politics. And in order to do politics, you have to satisfy certain criteria. And the purpose of politics is to change policy and to change habits and to advance the common good and to grow the people in virtue and to have a flourishing society, which is the charge of politics. And with respect to my friends in the podcast world, it seemed to me that after the 2024 election, you saw a major divergence between the interests of politicians and political activists on one hand and podcasters on the other, who were speaking in many ways about meta-political phenomena when they weren't talking about petty personal grudges, when they weren't trying to score ideological points as if politics were merely debate club. And my message was politics really is not only or even chiefly debate club. It's a practical art. It is the chief virtue is prudence. It's the art of the possible and the art of the second best. And so we need to, especially at this moment, make sure that we come together, because the context of AmericaFest was that this was the first big TPUSA event after Charlie had been assassinated. And everybody wants to speak for Charlie, and everyone wants to claim Charlie as agreeing with them on every single thing. And I find
drives me nuts. Yeah.
It drives me nuts. I find it really, really distasteful, and I won't do it. Even on those occasions when I have a good hunch of what Charlie would have thought, I just don't want to do it. However, we can all observe that what Charlie did was this. Charlie maintained a coalition. He did a billion things. He debated, he raised money, he advised presidents, but he maintained this coalition. That's what AmericaFest is. You bring in people, some of whom hate each other. You keep the really toxic elements out. You get everyone in line. You point them in a direction, and you have them actually effect something. That was his chief political contribution. It is why at his funeral, the chief of staff, Susie Wild, said that he made the winning difference in 2024. And I just felt that was maybe the last opportunity to remind people that if you want to pay homage to Charlie's political legacy, we ought to emulate what he did, and what he did better than anyone else in our generation.
Yeah, there's a lot of LARPing that goes on where people have shows like you and I do, and they say that they're doing politics. That's not the activity of politics.
Right.
That is a completely alien idea. That is more the work of the theori, right? It's more the work of people who are out there in the wilderness thinking and talking about things, and not the actual hard work of politics. And yet there's this shift in the American lexicon that's happened, I guess, over the last 100 years. You could say, I hate attributing everything to the progressives. Don't get me wrong. Many bad things can be attributed to the progressives, but they're not responsible for every single social evil that we face right now.
Right.
But this really does kind of start with Woodrow Wilson, where politics in the American lexicon becomes a dirty word, whereas politics, according to the Western tradition, was the good thing.
Yes.
That was the good thing as opposed to mob rule, as opposed to perverted democracies, perverted aristocracies, that oligarchies, things of that nature. And so I think you have to recover politics properly understood in order to get there. And so often I see on the right is a full-on rejection of politics.
Yes.
For principle, right? You see this all the time on social media, everywhere, that, well, my principles forbid me from working with or building a coalition with somebody. And it can be something rather serious, right? There are fences on the island where we need to protect those fences and make sure that we keep those unsavory characters out. But these issues are super petty. It's like, I reject a 25% tariff on EU automobiles rather than the 15% tariff. Like, that's the type of level that we're dealing with when we say, well, my principles forbid me from working with you. How do we go about shedding the right of this idea that politics is a dirty word?
Well, I think you've gotten right to the heart of the matter, and it requires a restoration of the classical view of politics over the myriad errors that have set in, not just since the 1960s or not even since the 19-teens, but that have set in since, I don't know, the 16th century. the 17th century at the latest. And
Yes.
the thinker that I come back to, to immediately abstract it all the way out into the realm of theory, is Michael
You are
Oakeshott.
a podcaster. This is okay. You're not an elected.
I get a pass, right? And I think Michael Oakeshott, the 20th century British political philosopher, gives us a good sense of this. In his essay, Rationalism in Politics, he says that ideology is to be eschewed by the conservative because he defines ideology as the formalized abridgment of the supposed substratum of rational truth contained in the tradition. A delightfully flowery way of describing this, but it bears repeating. The formalized abridgment of the supposed substratum of rational truth, only rational truth, contained within the tradition. And he says, that's not what we do. At that point, you have such a thin understanding of the world. This is the manifesto of the liberal or the leftist that fits in 5 bullet points on the back of a napkin. But you don't want that. In a different essay on being conservative, Oakeshott says that to be conservative is to prefer the actual to the possible, to prefer present laughter, ultimately, to utopian bliss. It's a practical inclination, and that works for me. So a lot of these debates that have broken out among the podcasters, one, involve, you fired me from this job 10 years ago, and you said this mean thing about me on some other podcast. Like, a lot of it really is petty, in as much as it involves ideas. A lot of the, which I'm happy to debate, I delight in debating ideas, but a lot of that debate is taking place at too abstract, too high a level. So one will say, well, this person is advancing, this podcaster is advancing through some nebulous means, I don't know how, through his microphone and magic. He is advancing a post-liberal, integralist, paleo-conservative, and that is completely unacceptable. I will never dine with this person because you see, I'm a pure libertarian neo-paleo-conservative who, in the arrangement of Frank Meyer, but only from 1963, not 65. And you just say, what are we talking about? What are we talking about? And to your point, I mean, the tariffs, I think, are a great example of this. The people suggesting that President Trump's theoretic embrace of tariffs, by the way, even practically, he doesn't embrace tariffs to nearly the degree that he has promised. But that's one of the criticisms of him, in fact, from certain corners of the right. But if the idea is that the president can't protect an industry, and then you're out, you're taking your ball and going home. So much for the Reagan coalition, right? Let's not forget, good old free trader Ronald Reagan protected U.S. Steel. So I would prefer if these debates would happen at a very practical level. But unfortunately, I see in the podcast wars maybe not so much a conscious decision, but the natural outgrowth of incentives. I see a battle of all against all, because in the old days, there was always a distinction between the political media and the actual hardcore doing politics class. However, they were more closely related. You'd turn on your cable news at night, and they would tell you about the bill that Congress was maybe going to pass. Now, however, in the new media, you no longer even really have networks. So people are increasingly going independent. I'm at one of the few remaining networks that was not founded for some other purpose. And mostly everyone is independent now, which means you no longer have to fit within the standards and norms and tones of a network. You no longer have to get along with the other hosts. And in fact, you have every incentive to go after all of the other hosts. And then furthermore, when you're when you're in power, you have every incentive to oppose the government. Because there just aren't a lot of clicks in independent media when you're supporting the people who are in power. So you get ever increasing degrees of sensationalism, radicalism, irrelevance, really, to practical matters. That's just built into the system, and so it's a pity. We need to figure out a way to fix that. But I would prefer if people would at least recognize the problem and not exacerbate it.
Yeah, and we should say that this is not just something that's happening right now on the right-wing media sphere. I had my little brother's in town for his 8th grade DC trip. And so I met up with them yesterday, and I had a parent, one of the chaperones, come up to me and say, what is one of the craziest things you've learned about politics since living and working in Washington, D.C.? And I said, the story is never actually what's printed on the page. It is actually often a contest of personalities for power. And that is the dynamic that you see playing out right now in the media. But it will also play out in future presidential elections. You bet your bottom dollar that when 2028 rolls around, there's going to be a whole lot of that. So you might see policy differences, but really what this comes down to is personal slights, folks trying to gain that competitive edge and advance their careers. So it's not just the podcasters that deal with this type of dynamic. It's everybody in politics. And that is actually what presents the real challenge is for people at home who are watching this all play out. They think to themselves, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. Now, I might be a little bit more black-pilled than you are on some of this stuff because you've recently been touring the country doing speeches with TPUSA and YAF. And you said this experience has kind of been white-pilling, that there's still a lot of really good youth energy for as much as we talk about how young men in particular who swung heavily towards Trump in 2024 might be not swinging back to the left, but not as enthusiastic about showing up for the midterms or in 2028.
No, I was just at Idaho. It was with TPUSA. TPUSA decided to continue Charlie's tour. And coincidentally, I was the first person to do that. Charlie and I were supposed to do an event together at University of Minnesota 12 days after he died. And they asked if I would come out and sub in on his radio show because they still had the radio show when he was killed. The show must go on, I guess. And so they were getting a bunch of his friends to sub in for weeks afterward. And I show up there days later, and they asked me. They said, "Hey, are you going to do that event at Minneapolis?" And I said, "Guys, this is entirely up to you. It's totally your thing. If you want me to do it, I will do it. I'll do it alone with an empty chair. If you don't want to do it, it's your call. It's your event. You make the decision. I don't want to weigh in on it." And they said, "We think you should do it," which was obviously the right answer. Very, very much in the spirit, of Charlie. And so we did that. It was a good event up there. It was right in the wake of it. People were still quite traumatized. It was clear at that point that the left was celebrating Charlie's death. So we finished that one out, and then TPUSA decided to continue the tour. And I was a little worried because the thing about assassinations is that they work. And no one wanted to acknowledge that. Everyone said, "Oh, well, you've struck Charlie down and we're devastated. But, we're going to come back 10 times stronger." And it's like Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. And that's copium. That's actually not how it works. Assassinations do hurt people. That's why people keep doing them. So I was a little concerned. The left also has been very aggressive in terms of reserving seats and then not showing up, or showing up and then leaving in the first 10 minutes. I mean, I've dealt with these tactics for 10 years now in my own tours. And so there was a real fear. There were kerfuffles when the administration was helping them out. But anyway, Walsh and I show up to Idaho, totally packed house, maximum capacity, very big venue. And then over 1,000 people were turned away at the door.
You didn't even know that many people lived in Idaho?
Truly. I mean, it was just amazing. I mean, even some of the guys were following my car out of the venue. I was doing an event after at a cigar lounge, of course, and they were just stopping by the car as I got out and saying, "Hey, can you sign the hat? Can we talk about this?" But it was really great. It was really, really white pilling. The questions in the room were great. I was waiting for it to be all sorts of inside baseball personality podcast nonsense, like we were just discussing. How could you work for that dastardly Ben Shapiro? Why won't you denounce the evil Tucker Carlson? Why, all of this kind of meta political stuff. It really wasn't that at all. It was people asking what to do now, how to deal with the Iran war, which is controversial among the wonk class, the right-wing think tanks and many rank-and-file conservatives, what to do about the economy. We had one little kid show up, mention that he wanted to become a priest, and Walsh decided to grill him on it. Very, very Matt Walsh thing to do. He said, "Why do you want to be a priest?" And the kid said, "I think God is calling me," which is the pitch-perfect answer. You had people debating matters of theology, and it was just really substantive, really good, a very, very positive event. And I thought, okay, I'm now reaffirmed in my previously held belief that I was doubting, that there is a distinction between Twitter and real life. There's overlap, but there is a distinction. And right. Even to your point, it's not just affecting the podcast class. That's true. It's all over society. But it occurred to me that 20 years ago, you say, what kind of Republican are you? Someone would say, I'm a John McCain Republican. I'm a Ron Paul Republican. 60 years ago, what kind of Republican are you? I'm a Barry Goldwater conservative. No, I'm a Rockefeller Republican. It was always referring to actual politicians who created public policy. Now, if you ask, you're much more likely to get the answer, well, I'm a Ben Shapiro conservative or I'm a Tucker Carlson conservative. In other words, it appears that the tail is wagging the dog, that the political media are really in the driver's seat of, they're at least in the position of prominence over the conservative politicians, which I guess is fine by me because I'm in that class, so I'm fine to be the belle of the ball. But in a proper political order, that would not be the case. You would have more of a focus on the real. In some ways, the sociologist Jean Baudrillard has become very popular in certain corners of the right. The man who promotes this idea of hyper reality wrote a famous book about how the Gulf War didn't really happen. It's just a sort of illusory phenomenon on television, and it's a delightful writer if you're into right-wing, plausibly right-wing postmodernism. He's a delightful writer, but his idea that you kind of abstract and concentrate something so far away that it's almost unrecognizable from the source material, I think that's where we've gotten with politics. And so you have to bring those things back together, or we will become frivolous. We will become superfluous. And the upshot of that will be that the left will actually do the governing, and we will all lose.
Yeah, the left will do the governing, and the left has done decades and decades of work, not only taking over our institutions. We knew that they had taken over the institutions. We knew they took over the universities. We knew they took over the media. They made no bones about that. Yeah. I think what we didn't realize was how extensive the patronage network was. We've learned this through the first year of the second Trump administration. USAID, we learned about the Somali fraud in Minnesota. And more recently, your colleague Luke Rosiak has a big story, and this is just the first one. It's going to be an entire series of how Medicaid dollars are going to prop up all of these different individuals, some of them even their political campaigns. And so first, your reaction to Luke's story, and second, what does this patronage network tell us about the modern left?
Yeah, it's a jarring story, which, of course, they gave me very little heads up on. I said, this is really good reporting. Who did this? Oh, it was Luke Rosiak at the Daily Wire. That's great. It's jarring not because there's massive fraud being paid out to favored groups from the left. We knew that was happening in Minnesota, California, and elsewhere. Ohio's a Republican state. So this is going on in Ohio. This was another one of the stupid claims made during the previous government shutdown, which was that illegals, some foreigners, they don't qualify for federal welfare. You Republicans are lying when you say we're shutting down the government to give welfare to illegals. But of course, that isn't true because the Medicare and Medicaid dollars are coming from the federal government, but they're being administered by the states. And so you're looking at a potentially billions of dollars scandal over Medicaid fraud in Ohio, in a Republican state. Once again, it is the Somalis driving it, and I have to tip my hat. It's very impressive. People are knocking the Somalis. These guys are the greatest fraudsters ever. They know how to exploit a weakness, and frankly, I think we all need to learn from the Somalis. We all need to have the humility to look at the most infamous pirate nation on earth and say, man, if this is how they're exploiting us, maybe we need to get our act together.
But this is how politics works. Yes. In these countries, which is why, aside from the cheap labor question, aside from all these other questions, it's why the left wants these particular types of migrants, right? Everyone made a very big deal out of President Trump saying that, why don't we go get some Norwegian guys instead of tailoring our visa system towards bringing Haitian migrants to the United States. And everyone called him a racist for it, of course. This is very infamous Trump 1 story. Conan O'Brien's wearing a shirt that says, Haiti isn't a bleep hole country. Little do we know that a few years later, there's going to be a massive amount of unrest. And there's this warlord named Barbecue who's accused of cannibalism. It sounds like a really great country. We should get more of those guys. But the reason that the left loves these types of migrants in particular and rig the immigration system towards these migrants is because politics works the way that they want it to work in their home countries, right?
Right.
It's patronage. It's money networks. It is, we will go along with the program so long as we're paid out. And I think that is the big mentality shift that I've had to deal with. Like, I knew there were money networks, dark money networks, all that type of thing. Act Blue, George Soros, yada, yada. I didn't realize how entrenched it was in the American left and how vital it was to the American left's success.
Well, and think about just when Elon went into the White House with Doge and he led the defunding of USAID. And we could start to see how this works, because USAID is supposed to be sending money around the world. And even that was pretty annoying, because they would promote super lib nonsense in great places like Hungary. You know, they tried to basically unseat Orban 10 years ago by sending in a bunch of lib US dollars. I hate that my taxpayer money was going to that. But it's even worse than that, actually, because USAID would take your money, and then USAID would not merely send it overseas, but they would send it to institutions like the Tide Center. The Tide Center would then launder that money, send it right back to the United States, and fund the BLM riots. So, you end up with blood on your hands as a U.S. taxpayer, and you're paying for your own defeat at the ballot box because they're funding, in this case, left-wing terrorists. And it's another lesson, too, by the way. The embrace on the left of political violence should cause all of us to raise our eyebrows. Because, when Charlie was killed, and when Trump was nearly killed, and the other times that Trump has nearly been killed, and there was a Democrat Senate candidate who was arrested. Yes. Yeah. I mean, now we're on this guy. There's a guy in jail now. He's running for Senate against Fetterman, and he has made multiple threats to murder the President of the United States. So this keeps happening. It is applauded by huge swaths of the American left at every single level, in the media, in elected office, and elsewhere, and they're rather unified on it. So look, I'm all for the pruning of a political movement. I'm all for shared values and all the rest of it. However, just in the last 2 weeks, we've seen Hassan Piker exalted once again by the New York Times. Hassan Piker, who's this young anchor baby, he was raised in the backwaters of Turkey. He comes to America again for college. He makes a ton of money. He's a Cartier communist, and he calls to murder multiple U.S. senators. Tom Cotton and Rick Scott, not just multiple senators, but really amiable, pretty moderate senators. He's calling for their murder. He says America deserved 9/11, of course. He tortures his animal on set. He just does a million things that you could easily prosecute or even deport him for. And he's exalted by the left. He's raised up by the New York Times. He's campaigning with Democrat candidates, and nobody says boo. There's no limit to how far left a Democrat politician can go. And so in our case, I think conservatives need to get with the program here and recognize that the left means business. They're bloodthirsty. They're explicitly calling for violence against us. If they were willing to kill Charlie Kirk, who is the most moderate, amiable of any of us, really, what would they do to everybody else? And they need to play nicely together, to oversimplify it, or we are going to be washed out. We have this generational opportunity with a unified government, with a president who's willing to be a little bit muscular, with a Supreme Court behind us. We have this generational opportunity to seize back some power from the institutions and wield it to suppress our enemies in a just and right way. If we do not actually succeed at that because of infighting or whatever, then all we will have accomplished is just irritating our opponents who have already told us they want us dead. And that's not a great idea when your opponents seem on the brink of winning more elections.
Right. Punishing the guy who beats his dog is probably a just use of force and authority. That actually,
I think so.
The origin of crimes against humanity actually stems from early animal cruelty laws in the Anglo-Saxon world, where it was a crime against your own humanity to do such a thing to a lesser being, right? Like, yes, you are over this being, but you are in charge of stewarding it, directing it, channeling those forces in a good way. So, of course, that is why I think, we should be using the generational moment that we have to go after our enemies. We just saw James Comey was once again gone after by the Trump DOJ. That's great. I also think some of the failures that we've seen in the first year of this administration or of this generational opportunity is part of the reason why some folks on the right feel demoralized. They feel demoralized because they think the Epstein files was pushed. They felt demoralized because we had an opportunity to go into Minnesota. 2 people did really dumb things trying to fight ICE agents, and they ended up shot and killed. This is, and then we backed off. And now we're starting to re-engage on that issue a little bit more. But I feel like that is some of the source of the right's current discontent, where they saw the generational opportunity and we looked around and said, okay, what have we actually done with it? Maybe the James Comey indictment is turning over a new leaf, the SPLC turning over a new leaf, but we only got a few months left to the midterms. They need to go really hard for a short period of time in order to, I think, re-engage and re-incentivize the base.
Yes, the biggest white pill in terms of the midterms, where by all rights we should be completely blown out of the water, is Louisiana versus Calais, the Supreme Court decision that got rid of race-based gerrymandering. That could swing, who knows, half a dozen seats to the Republicans or more. Kind of depends on how quickly the GOP governors can redistrict or re-redistrict. So that's something. But obviously all the headwinds would be against us anyway. And then the other issue that you left out, which is maybe the biggest of all, is the Iran war, which even though it maintains broad support among Republicans, even very high support among Republicans, I think that support is pretty soft. I think every day that it drags on, it's going to get much worse. And so from the beginning,
and you have to probe the counterfactual, right? You see these polls come out that says 90% of MAGA support the war in Iran. Well, like, what percentage of MAGA would have supported a Trump nuclear deal with Iran?
Right.
Not any lower.
Right.
Right. That wouldn't have been the case.
Yes. And then, as I said, from the beginning on the war in Iran, had I been on the National Security Council, nobody invited me, but had I been on the National Security Council, I would have made the arguments against it because it was so risky. There are some people who are making pacifistic arguments to say that we have no right to attack them, or they have a right to a nuclear program or something, none of which I think is true. They're a horrible regime. We've been fighting them for 47 years. They get what's coming to them, certainly. But one of the issues when one is adjudicating the justice of a war is the reasonable probability of success and what the direct objective would be. And so it seems to me, okay, if regime change is ultimately the objective, because you can't really negotiate with these people, then what's the probability of that success? I would have put it as relatively low. I think that the mullahs, for all their evils, are a pretty robust regime. That regime has lasted twice as long as the CIA regime that we installed in 1953 after we got rid of Mossadegh. So you really don't want to underestimate those people. And the bigger problem is, if Iran plays the biggest weapon it has, which is closing the Strait of Hormuz, a much more serious weapon than a nuclear weapon, because they can't actually use nuclear weapons. No one really uses them, other than us twice. Because of that, you can't back down. If we were to back down in the Strait of Hormuz, it would be a Suez moment like we saw in Britain and France, where you essentially surrender your global empire. If, however, we invade and actually try to topple the regime in Iran, that would be completely politically unacceptable from the domestic base. You'd lose essentially all your support. You'd go down like George W. Bush. So what do? It's Schrodinger's Strait. It's open and then it's not open, and we're using the War Powers Act, which is kind of fake anyway because Obama was in Libya for 8 months and Biden was in Yemen for a year, and on and on and on. Clinton was in Kosovo, whatever. The list goes on and on and on. So there's this fear that right now the Iran war is basically okay. And yes, most people don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. But it's so tenuous. At any moment, this thing could fall apart. And you fear that the only two options are a crappy deal, maybe worse than Obama's deal, or a ground invasion of Iran, neither of which we can take. Obviously, I don't envy the president's position here. And really, the U.S. has been in this position for a very long time. But then the question becomes, okay, if you felt you had to go do this, then we need to see massive progress on all of the other fronts. So the SPLC stuff is great. The prosecution of people who threaten the president, that's great. But the real one is immigration. That is what really drove the coalition all the way from the Golden Escalator onward. And I don't think he's gotten enough credit for the deportations. You had 700,000 formal deportations in the first year. If you count self-deportations, which I think are basically legit, that's another million or so. But there are 20 million illegals in the country. We don't know how many illegals there are. So I think that is the area the White House just needs to double and triple down on. And it might help stave off some of the real potential downside in Iran, which is the riskiest thing Trump's ever done.
Right. And It's interesting. I was looking at some of the polling on this, after this whole narrative came out. 90% of MAGA supports the war in Iran. I'm like, yeah, like the president's people are going to roll with the president. That is not surprising to me whatsoever. I don't care what you think about Vanguard. Like, this is a Vanguard poll. Whatever you think about it, it's probably accurate that 9 out of 10 Trump supporters or people who self-identify as MAGA are down with the program. One, as I mentioned before, the counterfactual. What if he got a better nuclear deal than Obama? Yeah. I think that deal would have had massive amount of support amongst the president's base as well.
Yeah.
But it's not just the president's base that wins the election. He's got a very large base. He has a larger base, I think, than the conservative movement, right? Yeah. This is what makes what we talked about at the beginning of the episode, all of this ideological isms, which is fundamentally anti-conservative, so toxic to winning, so toxic to building the coalition. Because in reality, you're going to end up with 20% of the American electorate on a good day who signs up for that program.
That's right.
So even if even with the large base of the president, you're looking at Trump 2024 voters. This is the coalition of the future. This is the coalition that delivered us generational opportunities to change the course of this country. Well, what have we seen over the course of the past year? From March of 25 to March of 26, we've seen the president's approval rating amongst Trump 24 voters go down 10 points. It range varies, 7 to 10 points. So they were 90% approved in March, and now it's down to about 80. That's still fairly good, you might say. Well, even if the decline in support amongst Trump 24 voters is 6%, and let's say that's evenly distributed across the country,
right?
You lose Florida. Florida, we won by less than 6 points in the 2024 election. And then you say, well, Bradley, gun to your head, you've got a Democrat and a Republican, you voted for Trump in 2024, you're not going to go the other way. You're going to pull the lever, however begrudgingly you may pull the lever, you'll still pull it for Republicans. Okay, let's say that's true for 4 out of the 6%, right? 4% stick with Republicans, 2% either don't show up or go the other way. That's still enough based on the 2024 election results, with Pennsylvania being 1.7 the margin, Arizona was around 2, and Michigan was around 2. Those 3 states alone would flip the election in the other direction.
Yeah.
So it's a really, really high, I mean, again, I don't envy the president at all. That's totally true. It's a really, really high stakes environment. And most of that drop in the support for the president has started to come as hostilities have ratcheted up with Iran dating back to June of last year.
Right.
He seems to lose folks who supported him in 24 whenever there's pretty intense military action. It goes for Venezuela as well. But with all that said, you need to find a way to hit that domestic agenda as hard as possible.
Yeah.
That State of the Union domestic agenda, I would have crawled over broken glass for it. And then that weekend, the Iran war started, and it seems like everyone forgot about it. Right. So how do you said double, triple down on immigration enforcement, totally with you there. But how do you reassert a robust domestic policy in this current political environment?
Look, the shift at DOJ is instructive in as much as we've gotten a lot more action in just the past couple of weeks than we did for a lot of the first year. And with all respect to Pam Bondi, one of the big PR flubs was the Epstein issue. And look, maybe it was just a hot potato and there was nothing that any attorney general could have done about it. But it was a big flub because, one, Epstein was a Democrat scandal. It started out as a Democrat scandal. When it really hit the fore in the mid-2010s, it was about Bill Clinton flying around on the Lolita Express. And then they basically hid it for the next 7 years. And then all of a sudden, when they had nothing else to clobber Trump with, and after they lost the popular vote, they decided to drag this out again. And unfortunately, there were certain staffers who played into that. And so now we have this new AG, and things seems to be happening. You're getting the DOJ action against the SPLC. You're getting the DOJ action against James Comey, and I hope we see a lot more to come. If some of the cabinet secretaries are not performing, then you gotta ditch them, and hope that you can ratchet it up. And then there's always the question of who is most influencing the White House. This once again has played into a podcast war scenario where the online chattering class seems to think that the two top advisors to President Trump are Mark Levin and Tucker Carlson or something. They're just fighting each other in the West Wing, and that simply isn't the case. So even there, to your point, Trump is MAGA. Trump is MAGA. The man is the movement, and that's good. That actually builds you a coalition that is larger than the nerds and the bow tie types who make up the actual conservative movement.
Right, and it's
great.
centered on statesmanship rather than an ideology or anything like that.
Yes, and this is principled, by the way. I mean, at least my view of politics, which I think, speaking for our dear friend Aristotle, is a very classical view of politics, is that politics comes down to prudential judgments, to men who are exercising their judgment, who hopefully have grown in virtue. Obviously, any politician is going to have certain weaknesses, but Trump has a lot of virtues, and he doesn't get enough credit for them. And so then looking forward, people say, well, who's going to win in 2028? Is it going to be the more kind of traditionally conservative J.D. Vance, or is it going to be the more neoconservative Marco Rubio? Once again, these two guys are working together hand in hand in the White House. So and Rubio has effectively already endorsed Vance, and Trump has already endorsed a ticket of Vance and Rubio. So even there, I think people are creating division where there isn't much. But
right, that is actually so true. It's totally it's a manufactured online thing where if you actually look at what these guys are saying in the media, some of it coming on background, like both of them had their doubts about the Iran war.
Right.
Marco Rubio more recently has been quoted on background expressing these doubts, but they're reading off the same hymnal. It's actually people who have proclaimed themselves to be surrogates of those candidates, claiming that there's some division here when there really isn't.
Yes, and so I think the way that the 2028 primary is going to go down is that it all things being equal, I'll have one big caveat at the end, but things as they are right now, it will not be decided on the basis of this issue or that issue. It will not be decided by this talking head or that talking head. It will not be decided by the wonks who want to make you read Russell Kirk instead of, I don't know, Hayek or someone. It will be or Strauss. I don't know. It will be determined by Donald Trump, because it's his movement and he's going to be the kingmaker. He's, God willing, going to live to be 150 years old. And that's how the show is run right now. So it'll just be The Apprentice. It'll be The Apprentice in the White House. That was, I think, really how it was always going to be going into the second term, with this weird situation of a non-consecutive second term. And the big caveat that I promised you at the top is the Iran war, because the Iran war could either be the great masterstroke of foreign policy, the best one since the end of the Cold War, or it could be absolutely devastating for the entire Trump legacy. It could overwhelm everything. And but even that is not really worth considering, because if the worst case scenario happens, a Republican just isn't going to win in 2028. So that everybody who is really, really viable right now is on the team. They are all marching in unison, all on the same page. I'll mix whatever metaphors we have to mix. So there is unity. There is basically a direction. There is a real effective political movement. The funny thing is, it's all happening outside of the media and think tank sphere that flatters ourselves as being the stewards of the conservative movement.
Yeah, and you may my entire career is praying to God that I'm wrong. I think I'm the only political commentator who prays every night that I'm proven dead wrong about some of most of the things that I say, whether it's Ukraine or Iran or any of this stuff. And I kind of forecasted it that I'm a little bit more black-pilled than you are on some of these things. But I have to keep in mind, I'm trying to remind myself of this pretty frequently, Trump is a victim of his own success. Mm-hmm. That in 2016, he completely changed the course of the conservative movement and the Republican Party that were heading for extinction by tapping into by having an actually conservative worldview and saying the situation has changed. We need to renegotiate these trade deals. We need to rethink our position on the global stage. We need to reshore manufacturing here in the United States. Enough of this globalist nonsense, right? He has been a victim of his own success because in 2020, of course, he was unchallenged, but in 2024, nobody was going to give you the wins that Donald Trump was going to give you, right? Like we voted for Donald Trump because we wanted the crystal meth version of, we didn't want any sort of drawn down opiate.
No Zin. We wanted the pure crystal.
We wanted the crystal meth of Donald Trump, and that is why he's the victim of his own success, because any other Republican president, you would look at him and say, this thing is going pretty darn well. This Iran thing could be pretty dangerous. Yeah. You know, maybe you're a plan truster, maybe you're a panican. I guess I'm more of a panican, but you could say 90% of everything is going pretty darn well. Well, Trump is having to deal with the spoils of his own victory and saying, no, I voted for crystal meth. I voted for the Save America Act. I voted for something really, really hardcore. And I'm waiting for you to give me that. So if there was one thing that Trump, you got the crystal meth that you wanted. The one hardcore thing that Trump would do before the midterms, what do you think it should be?
Before the midterms, before this weekend, before he has to leave office, it's the mass deportations. That's not an original answer, but that's it. That is the hard work that has to be done.
What's your number that you'd want to hit? Because there's been a lot, but do you have a number in mind saying like this would be the hardcore version of mass deportations?
Yeah, if you have 20 million, let's call it. We don't know. If you could deport 10 million people, that's pretty hardcore, right? That's pretty good. And it's not totally out of the realm of possibility, if you include self-deportations too. It's really not totally out of the realm of possibility, but it would be hard. It would be hard to do because the libs accuse us of deporting Abuela or the gardener or something, and then Trump responds and says, we're not deporting Abuela. You know, we're going after these face-tattooed rapist, criminals, serial killers. But the reality of mass deportations is you have to deport Abuela sometimes. Not all the Abuelas, but like some of the Abuelas got to go. And the reason I think it's so crucial now is not because I have any particular animus against our Latin American friends, or Somali friends. I guess I have a little animus against them because they keep defrauding me and taking all my money. But the real reason is in 2024, something happened that I didn't think could happen, which is that a presidential candidate ran explicitly on mass deportations. The most perfect issue to be called a racist in American politics. And then he won the popular vote at a time when the white percentage of the population is as low as it has ever been since it was just Pocahontas walking around here. And at a time where President Trump was growing his numbers, specifically among racial minorities. So you just have this perfect moment where you say everyone basically gets it. It's not about racism. It's not about any of this. It's about a nation having basic laws, basic order, and a culture that is common, an ability to thrive as a distinct people. That's what this is about. Everyone voted for it. I don't even want to call it generational as an opportunity. I mean, it could be a once in a century kind of opportunity.
It's a civilizational issue.
Civilizational, yes, yeah. So I would love to see that. How do you get there? Look, it's very, very difficult. I mean, ICE was not even really equipped to do this because the law has been intentionally neglected for so long. So, people like Stephen Miller have done an excellent job of, departments like DHS have done an excellent job of really, really growing that capacity. But you have to use it. And in terms of that big threat, which is all looming over us, which is the Iran war, I mean, this is the subject of the greatest concern that I have had. I am a very hopeful. Trump is the best president of my lifetime. I'm a plan truster for sure. This is the area of the greatest concern that I have had since Trump walked down the escalator. It could really derail things. And so it occurred to me, if Trump does negotiate his way out of this, even if the deal is as bad as Obama's nuclear deal, maybe even in some ways a little worse than Obama's nuclear deal, though you get the added benefit of you blew up a bunch of missiles and you killed a bunch of their guys. And so there, you'd get some benefit out of it. But even then, I think, some of the great presidents, and even the guys considered to be the toughest presidents of the last 100 years, a lot of them actually at the crucial moments were restrained. I mean, you think of Reagan famously, this involves Iran, when he responded to the Beirut barracks bombings by pulling the troops out of Lebanon. And he was able to rack up a lot of wins for his administration rather than getting bogged down in a quagmire in the Middle East. Truman, when Truman did not allow MacArthur to go into China, that to restrain the Korean War, that was good. It was good that he did that. And he's no one thinks that Truman was weak. Eisenhower, insisting upon staying out of Vietnam. We were advising a little bit, but he didn't want a major ground force in Vietnam. On and on again, presidents who were really tough, who led through periods of great prosperity in America. Paradoxically, even these really strong figures were kind of known by their restraint. And I think that if there cannot be a decisive military victory quickly, then even a not-so-good deal could pave the way for accomplishing a lot of the agenda that most people are much more enthusiastic about anyway.
Yeah, and you can feel the American economy reeling from it. And at the same time, we have been cushioned by the fact that this administration has set up good economic fundamentals beforehand. If we didn't have what oil was like 270 when we started this thing, now it's hovering around 4. I mean, we could be north of 5 had it not been for the moves that this administration made to create a good economic footing for growth. And so, of course, the Iran war is going to be a giant question mark moving forward. If anyone can move the needle on these issues, as you mentioned with the mass deportations, President Trump, it wasn't even an issue that was pulled. And then by the time 8 years later, 8 years later from the golden escalator, it's polling at over 50% of the population approves of mass deportations. It's just insane to me. So
that's amazing.
So you said it might not be as good or as comprehensive as the Obama deal, but if we can move past the Iran war as quickly as possible, that's a good thing. What do you think transpires after the war ends? This will be our final question, right? If the war ended in the next few weeks, what do you think could happen before November to be a big difference maker?
Well, you'll have to deal with oil being elevated for a long time. There's really no getting out of that. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed for weeks. You're going to have to deal with fertilizer shortfalls, LNG, petrochemicals. That's all kind of baked in. And some people have tried to suggest that this is really 5D chess, and it's actually great to close the Strait of Hormuz. That isn't true. But to your point, Trump
we're fighting
had given
for status quo ante right now is what we're doing.
Yes, yes, yeah. Because to your point, look, the Trump economic policies have been phenomenal. You have great jobs numbers. CNBC was dancing over them the other day. You have all-time stock market highs, at least until recently. Things are looking good. We were told the tariffs were going to destroy the global economy. How many times? That never happened. So luckily, we had this really robust Trump economy to help us weather that. But it's very difficult every day that goes by to see how the storm can be weathered. If we can get out of this thing without China really asserting itself in the Gulf, if we can get out of this thing with the Gulf states still eager to play ball with us and to play ball with Israel for that matter, and to continue to isolate Iran further, that I guess that would be good. That was really Trump's big initiative with the Abraham Accords, and it's very impressive that he pulled it off. If we can get out of all of that, it'll still ding us a little bit, because President Trump, the line he keeps coming back to, I really love it. He goes, "We're the hottest country in the world." He talks about it like we're a sports car or something, or a chick. We're the hottest country in the world because what Trump is doing is trying to attract literal investment into America. There's been a lot of investment as part of these trade deals, and from American companies and all the rest. But he's trying to attract investment into America, and he's trying to stave off the collapse of the American empire, which has been in decline for 25 years. And so you'll notice in those early days of the Iran war, Russia kind of backed off. Russia didn't want to back up the Iranian regime. They were kind of waiting to see how the chips would fall. So that's the game that he's playing here. Best case scenario, he maintains his unpredictability. He has weakened the regime in Iran such that we don't have to worry about them closing the strait again in 6 months. He has scared off China and Russia enough that we don't have to, we don't get triggered into another international incident. And then the focus really can be on building upon our wins. Venezuela was a win. It was an 88-minute win, and it will be good for the American energy industry. It'll be good for American hegemony in the Western Hemisphere. Maybe I'll get my tobacco out of Cuba following that. But the focus has to remain the United States as America first, advancing our interests in a leadership role. So that means Cuba's the 51st state, Greenland's the 52nd state, Venezuela. No, maybe not literally that. But we know things by what they are for. And so I think what would allay a lot of the fears of people who say, I don't want to be running around the Middle East and I don't want to be just bombing all these random countries, is you say, what is that for? What that is for is reducing mass immigration into America. What that is for is weakening our rivals to the economic betterment of the United States. What that is for is having a flourishing society that really can thrive on itself and not just be a money bag for the rest of the world. If Trump can do that, and I think he has an interest in doing that, then I think any missteps, if there were any, would be forgiven.
Well, he's pulled a rabbit out of the hat before. He might do it again, that president. Michael Knowles, thank you for coming on the Signal Sitdown.
Good to see you, sir. See you next time.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sitdown. If you liked what you heard here today, be sure to hit like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever before you go. And we love your feedback. It really does help the show. So please remember to leave us a review and comment who you'd like to see on future episodes of the Signal Sitdown. It's because of your support and your interest and your engagement that allows us to continue this incredibly fun work. And together, we'll continue to expose how Washington really works and affect real change. We'll see you next time on the Signal Sitdown.